Shadow and steel. Deep within the bowels of the Blackstone fortress, Lorgar pulled against the fabric of reality. Spectral images of daemons and damned souls tugged at the prim arch, trying to break his focus and so tempt him away from his cause. Fools! They know not whom they were dealing with. Lorgar cast his vision across the galaxy, frustrations waxing and waning like the tides of the warp. With the Cadian Gate collapsed, the Eye of Terror had expanded almost tenfold, thousands of worlds plunging into the void as the forces of chaos advanced. But for every victory, there were holdouts. Angron and his legions had come to grief against the iron hands of Medusa, and a stubborn resistance at Vestroia had slowed the advance in the northeast. Most frustrating to Lorgar was Agrippina, where the combined forces under the Lion continued to turn back every strike Lorgar had planned. Mortarion's push towards Fenris could still bear fruit, but without Magnus' assistance and with Alpharius still wrapped up in his little games, it would mean less support and more blood that could have been better spent elsewhere. But most troubling of all, the Dark God had been silent. Yes, he still felt the presence of the one master of chaos hovering over him, but it said nothing as Lorgar continued his plans. Why would it not give him direction? Why fall silent when the Emperor was still at large, invisible even to Lorgar's divination? Delays. As always, there were delays. He did not have long to delve deeper before a tremor drew his attention. The bridge, he thought. Perhaps Perturabo has found something to slake his frustrations. Lorgar pulled himself upright and conjured a portal, stepping through to the bridge with little difficulty. To Lorgar's own frustration, the Lord of the Iron Warriors was not the Primarch waiting for him. "Apologies if my arrival disrupted your meditation, brother," Alpharius asked, standing near the center of the room as Lorgar stalked up to him. "Where is Perturbo?" Lorgar growled. "Agrippina, I do believe," Alpharius replied. "From what I understand, he had grown tired of your toying and sought to seek a better means forward in the siege there. And he did not think of casting you out of my sight first." Lorgar loomed over Alpharius, the Lord of the Alpha Legion, not backing down as Lorgar continued. "My patience has waned considerably over these last few years, and you seem to be the root cause of much of my misery. Then perhaps a peace offering is in order." Alpharius stepped back to give himself some space before reaching into his cloak, drawing forth a black blade encased in a shimmering glass sheath. "Behold the Anathaim blade, as promised." Lorgar stopped himself, inspecting the weapon with both sight and mind. It certainly matched the image of the blade that struck down Horus, and the tug of chaotic energy was unmistakable. But Alpharius is known for his deceptions. "I had expected to have this in my possession some time ago," Lorgar said, his voice even. "Why now, after all this time, are you presenting it to me?" "Brother, I am wounded that you would consider such duplicity." Alpharius lowered the blade, turning it in his hand as he continued. "The tides of the warp have been disrupted by all that has happened. It would not behoove you to show a little more understanding for one such as me. But now I have the Anathaim blade, perhaps you will be more lenient towards me." "So you say." Lorgar turned, summoning a throne in the center of the bridge to sit. "But I still remain unconvinced. I imagined you would, and for that I thought a demonstration would be in order." Alpharius stepped away, waving towards the dark. Out of the shadows came several Alpha Legion Terminators, carrying with them an Asteroutes in bronze Terminator armor marked with a red bull's head. One of the Alpha Legionnaires carried a large shield, the other a spear, and from their markings Lorgar guessed they were the captive Marines' weapons. "On my way here I found myself among the fleet of the Minotaurs. A brutish force, perhaps one that with the right persuasion may join our cause against the Empress. I decided to collect a small souvenir." "I see." Lorgar reached out with his powers. The Asteroutes was still alive, though he appeared frozen in a state of rage. "Stasis grenade. And you mean to offer him as a sacrifice to the Anathaim blade? Anyone named to the blade that suffers even the slightest of wounds is damned to die the most agonizing of deaths," Alpharius said, drawing the Anathaim from its sheath. "Horus lingered due to his great strength and the manipulations of your henchmen. How long do you think this one will last? Perhaps long enough to rid me of your stench?" Lorgar refrained from speaking, reaching out with his powers to probe the stasis field around the loyalist. Alpharius positioned himself near the center of the room, twirling the Anat-Haim around in his hand like a child playing with a stick. Well, go on then. Break the stasis and allow me to prove myself. If that is your desire. Lorgar increased his power, seizing the stunned Astaroths before shifting his focus once more. The stasis field dropped away, and with a strained roar the loyalist pulled himself forward, taking up the spear and shield where the other traitors had placed them. Ah, you survived, Alpharius said, stalking around the loyalist as the newcomer prepared himself. I must say, your reputation as one of the Emperor's strongest is well deserved, Lord Moloch. Traitor, the Space Marine growled, bringing his shield forward as he brought his spear to his shoulder. You may think to taunt me, but not even the foulest machinations of chaos can strike me. So you have said. Alpharius said, bringing the Anat-Haim into a guard position. Or, perhaps it is not you. I distinctly remember killing you, 400 years ago? The Apollos Crusades. This caused Moloch to hesitate, even for the briefest of moments. Oh, but perhaps it wasn't you. Perhaps some other Lord Moloch died at my hands, a coward drowning in his own bile in a puddle of mud. Quite pathetic, I must say. Moloch lunged forward, aiming his spear at Alpharius' head. The Primarch swatted the blade away with a flick of the Anat-Haim, the cursed sword ringing with the slightest touch. Alpharius stepped to his right, weaving around Moloch as the enraged Astaroths brought his shield up to block a potential strike. But beyond adjusting his footing, Alpharius did not move to attack. The loyalist attacked again with a lower strike, but once more found only air as Alpharius dodged away. You are quick for a man of your size, my friend, Alpharius said, still not positioning himself for an attack. Truly, the Minotaurs chose a worthy bearer for the name Astrian Moloch. Perhaps it is a name I might take when all this is over. You will not live to see the day, traitor. Moloch surged forward and swept his spear downward. Alpharius dodged once more, but the Astaroths still managed a glancing blow across the Primarch's left shoulder. Your kind are all the same hollow threats and delusions of glory. I have slain thousands of your ilk in my time as master of the Minotaurs, and I never tire of seeing your confidence shattered beneath my boots. As others that have preceded you have no doubt said before, Astrian Moloch, Alpharius drew away, bringing the Anat-Haim close to his face. But then, that is merely a title. You are not Astrian Moloch, any more than you are the first to bear that name. No, I searched through the files of you Minotaurs before bringing you here, and I am surprised to learn your true name is Zacchaeus Calrose, late of the 5th Company. Lorgar watched, spotting a thin light enveloping the length of the Anat-Haim. For this part, the loyalist spotted it as well, hesitating as he kept his shield at the ready. You know not what you speak of, traitor, Moloch growled. That name is dead. Alpharius said nothing, lowering the Anat-Haim and sagging his shoulders like a scolded child. And now, so are you. With that Alpharius lunged forward, his movements so fast that even Lorgar had difficulty tracking the other Primarch. Moloch sought to bring his shield around once more, but Alpharius easily slipped past and struck, the Anat-Haim punching through the back of the loyalist's Terminator armor and out through his forehead. The Astaroths ceased for a moment before falling limp, spear and shield tumbling to the ground as Alpharius withdrew the Anat-Haim from his victim's head. Lorgar leaned back in his throne, watching as Alpharius brought the now inert blade around while his sons stepped forward to recover the corpse. Well, are you satisfied? Alpharius asked. With a single whisper of a victim's name, the Anat-Haim can pierce any armor and strike any soul. I could have done without the theatrics, but I believe you have proven your point. Loath as I am to admit it, Lorgar thought. Now, hand it over. Alpharius was silent, thought Lorgar could sense dissatisfaction radiating from the other Primarch. Still, Alpharius turned the blade once more in his hands, holding the handle out for Lorgar to grasp. What are you doing, Lorgar? Lorgar gasped, his hand trembling as the presence of the dark god fell upon him. My lord, he gasped, drawing his hand back and standing from his throne. I must attend to other matters. After all this you merely turn away, Alpharius muttered as Lorgar moved to leave. I will still require the Anat-Haim, Alpharius, Lorgar countered. Do not think to spirit it away behind my back. A quick warp portal would take Lorgar back to the center of the Blackstone Fortress, and then he could stand in the presence of the Dark God in private. He stepped back into his alcove at the heart of the fortress, the shadows shifting as he called the warp back to him. "My lord, I apologize that I am troubled at this time. I await the opening of the final gates that will allow me to walk astride the mortal realm," the Dark God said. "And here I find you fretting over small trinkets. The Anatheim is a great weapon, my lord. It is one that I shall use to strike down as many of my brothers as I need, should they not see the light of your majesty. The death of one man, even a primarch, means nothing to me." Lorgar felt a chill roll down his spine, a scraping noise like claws against metal filling his ears. "I want the Imperium to shatter, to reveal the truth of mankind's lies for all to see, and I cannot have that happen as you have allowed the war to progress." Lorgar hesitated. Yes, grand strategy was never his strong suit, but the forces of chaos had done well so far, hadn't they? "I am sorry that our advance is not to your liking, my lord. You rely too much on these trinkets, Lorgar." The Dark God's presence shifted again, Lorgar feeling ethereal energy caressing his armor. "This fortress is not used as a weapon, a means by which I can strike the galaxy as I am meant to. Instead, you use it as your own prison, a shackle instead of a sword meant to bring my word to the enemy." "But I dash. No excuses, Lorgar." Lorgar choked as the presence wrapped around his neck, his power useless as he was lifted a meter off the ground. "You hide away, thinking that sequestering yourself is your strength. Is that not the same weakness the Emperor uses to manipulate mankind into doing her bidding? I do not lie to my allies and followers." Lorgar protested. "Do they know that?" The Dark God tossed Lorgar to the ground, the Primarch pulling himself back to his feet as the Dark God continued. "Though you may claim some victories on the field of battle, you are losing the message written in the destruction of Kadaya. Fringe conflicts bog down your expansion, and yet you seem content to let them play out. What does that show of the true uniting power of chaos?" "You are right," Lorgar lowered his head. "Forgive me, for I have allowed my complacency to slow your vision." "You are forgiven," the Dark God replied. Lorgar could feel the presence drifting over him again. "But my forgiveness can only last so long. I want results, Lorgar, not mere sermons on that which I already know." "Of course, my lord. What is your command?" "Go to Agrippina and break the stalemate. Take Angron with you, for I doubt Perturabo's strength in these matters. But leave this fortress to Mortarion, for you use it as a crutch to avoid taking a hold of true strength." "Of course, my lord," Lorgar nodded. "And of Alpharius? What of him? You sought to claim the Anatheim, and now it is yours. I have given you all the instruction you need to move our forces forward. How you do that I leave to your discretion." Lorgar nodded once more, though he could feel the presence of the Dark God closing around his throat once more. "Do not fail me, Lorgar, or I may find a champion more worthy of my majesty." And with that Lorgar felt a shift in the warp, the Dark God moving on to greater matters than directing him. He stood in silence, his eyes flicking across the room for any further sign of his god's direction, but when he found none he allowed some of the tension in his body to subside. "I will not fail," Lorgar said. "I swear, I shall produce a victory worthy of the Dark God." Forces of the Iron Warriors have entrenched themselves in the northeastern quarter of Agrippina. As is expected of Perturabo's ilk, they are fortifying and amassing for future assaults, and no doubt have been repurposing the Forge World's machinery to build their weapons. I have dispatched 10 regiments of Imperial Guard forces and a number of Astaroot's companies to maintain pressure, but I will need more substantive damage to prevent their expansion. I trust that you will know exactly how to disrupt these traitors in the most efficient manner possible, so the specifics I leave to you." The Lion's instructions had been straightforward. "I suppose he is getting used to serving alongside others again," Korax thought. He had taken position at the loading ramp of the Thunderhawk, waiting for the signal that they were over the target. Behind him stood Captain Cornix and his veterans, the first in a hand-picked group ready to rip the heart out of the Iron Warriors' preparations. No words were exchanged as they neared the drop zone, the Raven Guard confident in their Primarch's leadership to carry them through. "And perhaps I shall not betray that trust," Korax thought. Though Terra would protest that dismissal, no doubt. The Thunderhawk rocked, the first of what was to be many near misses from Flug. There was a brief burst of static before the pilot spoke through the COMM. "We are on final approach to the fortress, my lord," the Asteroots said. "Our escorts are coming under fire, and we have spotted enemy aircraft approaching." "Maintain course," Corax replied. "Contact Librarian Hawk and tell him to begin his enchantments." "Understood, my lord." The Vox clicked off, just as another near miss rocked the Thunderhawk. The veterans held, quietly activating their weapons in preparation for the drop. Corax held off, instead stroking the handle of one of his pistols as he waited for the signal. Such strikes had become commonplace during the battle for Agrippina, so there was no reason to project anything other than the utmost calm. "The Empress created us to know no fear." There was a chime, and the boarding ramp lowered to give Corax a view of the battlefield. The Iron Warrior's fortress was much like the others Corax had encountered during his travels, stark, industrial, bristling with weapons of all kinds. A kilometer-wide killing field surrounded the fortress, with the wrecks of hundreds of Imperial Guard and Chaos vehicles dotting the landscape. Rows of trenches and bunkers separated the killing field from a large wall, tracers and shells crisscrossing the lines as attackers and defenders tore through one another. The guns along the wall focused primarily on Corax's air assault, flak burst filling the sky as the two Raven Guard Thunderhawks and escorting Valkyrie and Vendetta gunships swooped in for the insertion. Beyond the wall, though, the fortress seemed almost underdeveloped for an Iron Warrior's stronghold. Secondary and tertiary defensive lines and bunkers could be seen, but their weapons seemed unusually quiet. Outside activity was depressed as well, with only a few tanks and soldiers moving about. Corax frowned. As far as traps went, it was blindingly obvious what awaited the Raven Guard should they land, and even for traitors the Iron Warriors were not fools. "Stay vigilant, my sons," he said, pulling one pistol from its holster. "The Iron Warriors have sparse forces below, but I anticipate any multitude of ambushes awaiting us." There was a low murmur of agreement, cut off by another flak burst exploding outside the Thunderhawk. "We are in position, my lord," the pilot called. "Empress willing, we will be in place to extract you once the mission is complete. A detonation in any sufficiently strong power relay may make direct extraction impossible, but we will inform you as events progress." Corax readied himself. "Provide support to the guard, for they will need all the assistance they can get." "As you command, my lord." With that Corax surged forward, his jump pack flaring as he leapt into the open air. The rest of the veterans from both gunships followed soon after, the two Thunderhawks pulling away as the Asteroots descended. Almost immediately the aircraft came under fire, now that Librarian Hawk's illusions had shifted from the Thunderhawks to the veterans, but Corax could not focus on their fate right now. All he could think of was what the Iron Warriors had in store for them below. Corax shifted his fall towards the nearest gun platform, a quad autocannon currently taking shots at the flyers overhead. The traitors manning the gun did not realize Corax was upon them until he struck, quick headshots dropping the Marines with ease. With a clearer opening, Cornix and his veterans dropped in to join the prim arch, some taking extra care not to jostle the Dark Age era munitions the Lion had lent them for the mission. As they landed, though, Librarian Hawk let out a sharp hiss as the shrouding spell began to fade. "What is it?" Cornix asked, moving to his fellow Asteroots while Corax checked ahead. "There is something," Hawk started. "There is something blunting my powers here. I cannot be sure as to what. The traitors, some relic of the Mechanics. We will need to advance carefully if we are to dash. Contact." Corax turned just as the veterans broke, some ducking for cover while others rose up to better engage the new threat. A squad of traitors carrying heavy weapons had deployed on a nearby gantry, their chain cannons spinning in preparation to fire. Corax slipped into the shadows as the traitors fired, bullets peppering the Raven Guard as they sought out a means to counter-attack. "Find a way into the fortress," Corax called to the others. "I will draw their attention away from your search." He did not wait for a response before moving towards the Chaos Marines, rising up to get a better angle before taking a shot. The bolt of plasma melted through the leader of the traitors, the others turning just as Corax revealed himself. He shifted right, bullets trailing after him as the enemy sought to bring him down. Korax landed beyond the first defensive line and broke into a run, drawing his second pistol as more shots traced him. Other gun emplacements pivoted towards him, bullets and rockets slamming into the ground as he dodged away. Out in the kill zone there were few shadows Korax could use to his advantage, only speed and agility could save him from the hailstorm of fire that followed him. He dodged right, just in time to avoid a trio of rockets fired from a corrupted defense turret before rising up into the air. Korax singled out that turret and dove, driving his boot into the targeting array to keep it from firing again. Korax worked quickly, moving around the base of the turret before throwing his weight against it. Several smaller rounds pinged off his back, but the Iron Warriors had no chance to capitalize on that development before Korax wrenched the turrets from its mooring, exposing a hole within the fortress that he slipped into. Below, Korax could see a number of servitors working to reload the missiles that were no longer there, the Primarch paying them no mind as he forced himself further into the fortress. Korax eventually found himself in a cavern, roughly expanded to allow the traitors to move through without much difficulty. He slipped into the shadows, just in time to avoid detection from an automated sentry gun, and slowly Korax began to make his way into the heart of the fortress. Above he could hear the roar of battle as the Iron Warriors and Imperial Guard continued to hammer one another, but he pushed that thought out of his mind as he continued forward. He turned down a sloping pathway, his hand brushing against the wall as he searched for his sons. The wall seemed to tremble at his touch, a small flicker of green and blue light racing down the hallway. This is not the work of traitors, he thought, stopping as he once more brushed his hand against the wall to recreate the effect. He watched the tremor racing down the hall, picking out the slightest flicker of alien runes among the light. Perhaps this is what has drawn the traitors here, and perhaps what was blocking the powers of our librarian. Korax's thoughts were interrupted by a crackle from his vox. Lord, Cornix's voice called. Can me? I have made it into the fortress, Korax said, moving to the center of the hall to try and get a better signal. What is your status? We have entered the fortress, more static. Alone for now. 2 of our brothers, recovered them. We must keep moving if we are to counter the Iron Warriors' preparations. I will do what I can to find you, but stay alert, I feel there is more than just the work of chaos down here. With that the vox closed out, Korax once again returning to the shadows as he made his way further into the depths. Around him the air seemed unnaturally cold, and the sound of battle had long faded into nothingness. In the dark, Korax had no concept of distance or direction, even his enhanced senses struggling against the shadows around him. After what could have been only a few minutes or several hours, the path opened up and Korax found himself standing on a wide platform of some kind. Discarded pieces of mechanicum machinery lay strewn across the floor, some stacked up to reinforce barricades while others were set aside to be stripped for usable material. Beyond, Korax could see the platform continuing out for several meters before plunging into the abyss, the darkness once more closing in to shield everything beyond from sight. Korax looked to his left, spotting a thick stone arch rising up towards the ceiling supported by a number of stone and metal buttresses. Support arches of some kind? He thought, stepping further into the room to get a better view of what lay before him. From further in, Korax could see the arches were far too smooth to have been carved by hand, with some sections taking a hexagonal shape the closer the Primarch inspected them. Definitely alien in their design. How long had the tech priests of Agrippina known of this? And what do the Iron Warriors intend to discover? Korax was once again taken from his thoughts by a commotion from above. He turned, spotting Cornix and his veterans rushing out of a hallway, tracer fire and plasma following after them. One of the veterans must have spotted Korax, for the Raven Guard angled downward to reach the Primarch as he waited for them. My lord, Cornix called as he dropped down to reach him. We have been pursued by traitors. I apologize for leading them in here. No need to apologize. Korax replied, spotting a squad of traitor marines storming through to take up positions on the gantry above. Have your men begin planting the explosives along these support arches. I will hold off the traitors while you complete this task. My men can work on their own librarian hawk and I will join you in holding off the traitors. Korax was quite confident he could deal with the traitors alone, but the Shadow Captain and the Librarian could do well to clear the traitors more quickly. "Stay close to me, then," he said, preparing his pistols as he continued. "Once we make contact, the rest will move to begin setting the explosives. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord." "Good." Corax stepped past the veterans and leapt into the air, just as the first of the Iron Warriors began to fire down at them. Bullets streaked past him before he reached the platform, vaporizing the first Iron Warrior's head with a plasma blast before he fell in with the others. He swung out with his free hand, taking the second Chaos Marine across the face with his claws. Cornyx surged forward to fill the gap, deflecting a strike from a nearby Iron Warrior before gutting the traitor with his sword. The traitors began to fall back, laying down a hailstorm of fire to delay the Raven Guard, but Librarian Hawk managed to scatter their fire with a shrouding spell while Corax and the Shadow Captain prepared to pursue. Cornyx took point, smacking a traitor across the face before driving the edge of his shield into the enemy's throat. He turned quickly to catch a chainsword before it struck him, sparks flying as the traitor's weapon ground against the Shadow Captain's sword. Corax fired, the plasma burning through the Iron Warrior's chest before Cornyx freed himself and kicked the dying traitor away. He brought his shield up again, deflecting another burst of gunfire as he advanced with Croax strafing right to find another opening. For their part, the traitors maintained their discipline, laying down volleys of covering fire as they withdrew further down the hallway. "They are trying to bait us onward," Corax thought, slipping back into the shadows as he took a position over the main entry. Cornyx and Hawk seemed to get the same idea, breaking away and moving towards the darkness while the traitors continued to fire. Just then, a torrent of fire filled the cavern, but to Corax's surprise it came from the levels below rather than the current focal point of the Iron Warrior's push. He shifted again, finding another platform to hide on as he took in the situation below. Several large squads of Iron Warriors arrived. Most were carrying heavy weapons, chain cannons, and heavy bolters already preparing to fire, but a number of them were twisted raptors taking to the sky to find Corax's veterans. Lording over them, though, was a figure Corax had not seen in millennia, a biomechanical giant in grey armor, a glowing thunder hammer clutched in his right hand as he sprayed the ceiling with the cannons mounted on his left. Perturabo. The Lord of the Iron Warriors was flanked by a retinue of Terminators, their power weapons a steady glow among the flicker of tracer fire and muzzle flashes. "Bring me the heads of every last Raven," Perturabo bellowed, sweeping his weapons across the cavern again. Even Corax had to draw further into the shadows to avoid being hit. "Do this, and I may spare you for allowing them to get so far through the defenses." The traitors fanned out, taking up positions while the raptors lunged into the darkness. Some found their mark, tackling the Raven Guard veterans from where they had been planting their munitions and exposing them to withering fire. Corax took flight once more, angling on one of the heavy weapons squads before diving downward. He struck fast, taking the head off one traitor with his boot before sweeping his claws through a second. He did not stay long, though, for Perturabo pivoted towards him and fired, several shells finding their mark before Corax made his escape. "Corax! I had thought you would be sneaking about here with your cowardly sons. Forgive me if I still have the common sense to not bellow my location for the galaxy to see." Corax replied, moving up again to pick out another target. Some of the heavy weapons teams had stepped back, to better cover one another in preparation for Corax's return, but this had the added effect of drawing down the fire, hammering the veterans above. The Raven Guard broke away, pursued by the raptors as they maneuvered to more advantageous positions. Cornyx and Hawk rushed to join their brothers while Corax continued to search for an opening against Perturabo. "You have no idea what you are attempting here, do you?" Perturabo asked, pausing his attacks to push his men forward. "This facility is yet another example of the secrets your precious Emperor kept hidden from us. The Mechanikus have been excavating his cavern since before Horus' rebellion, sneaking its relics out to distribute among the rest of the Imperium. And this is supposed to concern me how?" Corax asked, finally seeing an opening and charging. The target Havocs spotted him, bringing their weapons around and blazing away, but only a few superficial hits scarred Corax's armor as he charged in. Hot blood splashed across his armor as he tore through the chest of the first traitor, using the marine's last bits of strength to pivot his weapon around and pour ammunition into the back of a second. Corax jumped back, staggering as chain cannon fire slammed into his right arm. These pretenders do not even hold to their emperor's own ideals for the Imperium. Perturabo growled, turning his guns on Corax as the Raven Guard Primarch took flight once more. This is Xenos tech, pure and simple. Do you think they actually care for what came before them, the work you and even I have done to give them this chance? You make it seem like you actually care for the fate of mankind. Man is weak, diseased. I have no qualms about eliminating a broken system and building something more efficient from the ruins. Perturabo fired, but Corax was already out of sight. It's bleeding hearts like Lorgar and your precious emperor who delude themselves into believing they can save mankind, make it better through their blind worship of weakling gods or delusions of their own strength. Steel and blood alone will cut out the rot, and a new mankind will dominate the weaklings that remain. You have changed little since the heresy, Perturabo. Corax landed behind the Iron Warrior's Primarch. You preach efficiency, but you are only a herald of slaughter. You cast aside everything that doesn't fit your standards as broken, and make no effort to improve upon what caused the break in the first place. Why shouldn't I? The Imperium cast me aside like trash, so why should I not apply the lessons your dear Emperor taught me? Corax lined himself up for another strike on the Havocs. It would be difficult with Perturabo so close, but if he kept his wits about him Corax could get away. Did it, or did your inability to see past your own brilliance blind you to what your treason actually achieved? Corax lunged forward to strike, but Perturabo was ready. A wild swing from the great hammer Forgebreaker caught Corax in the chest, ceramite crumpling as the air was driven from the Primarch's lungs. Corax landed near the edge of the platform, the Iron Warriors giving him no chance to recover before hammering him with gunfire. That is easy for you to say, Corax, Perturabo said, storming forward and bringing Forgebreaker towards Corax's head. He dodged, the hammer crushing the platform where his head had been while Perturabo continued to track him. After all we did, do you know what the Emperor actually gave us? Nothing. Perturabo twisted, swinging Forgebreaker around while Corax leapt back into the air. It was just the next mission, nothing more. Moving from siege to siege, battlefield to battlefield, while the pompous and weak reaped the reward. Did the Imperial fists have to push through mire and mud for some backwater that was forgotten from the Emperor's sight? Did the Ultramarines have to immediately move on after destroying some primitives that didn't kiss Guilliman's ass? Were you ever branded a waste because you sought the cover of shadows instead of kowtowing to the Emperor's lapdogs? Corax returned to his pistol, taking a shot at Perturabo as he braced himself. The plasma shot did little against the flesh-metal hide of the Daemon Primarch, and Corax was forced to move once more as Perturabo fired on him. Below, Cornix and Hawk had moved to take on Perturabo's forces, the Shadow Captain darting among the Iron Warrior's Terminators while the Librarian continued to provide cover. Above, the veterans had pushed back the Raptors, but the deluge of fire prevented them from reaching the explosives. Just then, a tremor shook the room, a wave of force buffeting Corax as he tried to maintain his balance. A drone filled the air, with some of the Chaos Marines and Librarian Hawk recoiling from the sound. Corax moved to try and assist the Librarian, but the drone struck once more and even he could feel a flare of pain within him. For the briefest of moments, he saw an image of a red planet flicker across his eyes. Corax shook himself free from the vision and dove, coming to a stop next to Hawk as he continued to struggle. Cornix stepped forward to shield the Primarch and Librarian, parrying an incoming axe from a Terminator before slashing the traitor across the face. "What is it?" Corax asked. "Whatever is blunting my powers," Hawk said, grimacing as he reached for his head. "It is here. I had heard rumors of deposits of blackstone across the galaxy, but this is greater. More powerful." The Librarian looked to Corax. "You saw the vision, didn't you?" "Yes. I believe that whatever is here has designs for Mars. I must make sure this place is destroyed before Corax stopped and twisted, bringing his calls up just in time to catch a strike from Forgebreaker before it connected. "Letting your guard down, are we?" Perturabo asked, pushing against Corax to keep him from fleeing. "Pathetic," Korax. Cowards like you are the reason the Imperium has degraded into a cesspool of savages. My lord. Hawk got back to his feet, bringing his hand around as the air rippled. Perturabo growled, thrashing his head to shake off Hawk's enchantment while Korax slipped free. I can still hear you, sorcerer. Perturabo bellowed, bringing his guns around and aiming at Hawk. Neither Korax or the librarian had a chance to respond, the heavy shells pulping much of Hawk's upper torso and knocking him towards the edge of the platform. Korax lunged forward towards Perturabo, but the Lord of the Iron Warriors caught the strike with Forgebreaker before kicking Korax back. At least now you know what we are facing here, Perturabo said, stepping towards Korax as the Primarch moved to a defensive position. Whatever is here has the power to tear down the Temple of Lies that your Emperor has constructed. He and Lorgar will die, and only those that show true strength will remain. You would use Zeno's technology to overthrow the Imperium? Korax asked. As if turning to the powers of chaos were not enough, you choose to descend further into your treason. I did not betray the Imperium, Korax. Perturabo prepared one more salve from his guns, but Korax was on the move. He ducked right, twisting under the Daemon Primarch's arm before jabbing his pistol into the flesh metal. One overcharged blast tore through flesh and steel, sizzling chunks cascading around Korax before a jab from Forgebreaker drove him back. While I fought and bled our enemy dry, the Emperor betrayed the Imperium and set himself up as a god. Lorgar chose to kiss the feet of his pathetic dark god for a fleeting chance at power. I would turn chaos against itself, show that man is the one true god, strength of body and mind the only tenets of worship. If I have to use methods that offend your delicate sensibilities, then so be it. You're even more delusional than I thought, Korax said, leaping away from another strike. And you are in my way. Now die. Perturabo took Forgebreaker in a two-handed grip, charging forward and swinging for Korax's head. Korax ducked underneath the swing, punching upward and slicing Perturabo across the chest. The Daemon Primarch shifted his stance and brought the hammer downward, the hilt jabbing into the back of Korax's right leg. Momentarily staggered, Korax could not respond before Perturabo struck with his right arm, a vicious backhand catching Korax across the face. He fell back, but bucking his legs out crushed Perturabo's arms against his chest, interrupting the Daemon Primarch before he could line up a killing blow. Korax rolled back to his feet and grabbed his pistol, firing two more shots into Perturabo's chest as the other Primarch advanced. Even overcharged the plasma did little at this range, and another wild swing saw Korax disarmed and the crumpled remains of the pistol skipping off into the dark. Perturabo kicked Korax in the chest, the Raven Guard Primarch rolling with the strike and taking to the air once more. He swept around Perturabo's left and dove, grabbing the Primarch's arm to keep him from making another attack with Forgebreaker. Pinning Perturabo's arm with his left, Korax fired his jump pack and struck downward with his right hand, lightning claws punching through Perturabo's flesh just shy of his throat. Perturabo roared and grabbed Korax's arm, crushing the servos beneath his fist before yanking upward. Korax was thrown free, and Perturabo brought his hammer around and slammed Korax into the ground with a violent swing. Blood splattered across Korax's chest as he coughed, Perturabo stepping back to survey his work. Weak, just as I remember you, he said, taking Forgebreaker in both hands. I would say that I will miss the opportunity for you to see my work complete, but I do not. Korax tried to pull himself back to his feet, but there would be no time before Perturabo finished his strike. Just as the Daemon Primarch struck, though, Captain Cornix rushed forward and brought his shield up, Forgebreaker ringing as it smashed against the force field. My lord, Cornix said, bracing as Perturabo tried to force the hammer down. Assist my brothers in finishing the demolition. I will hold him off for as long as I can. Korax hesitated. Yet another of his sons would die for his weakness, his foolhardy attempt at taking vengeance. But if I can make Cornix's sacrifice meaningful. Korax got back to his feet as Cornix slipped out from underneath Forgebreaker, burying his power sword in Perturabo's arm to draw the Daemon Primarch's attention. Korax took flight, his ascension wobbly from unseen damage, but he was soon able to reach the remaining two veterans as they continued their struggle against the raptors. He knocked one traitor aside, ducking through the scrum until he reached the explosives. I will have to shorten the timer for only a few seconds, he mused, running his hands across the controls as he reset the timer. It may be all I need. Korix pressed the last activation rune, the light flickering before a high-pitched whine filled the room. Korix dropped away, slipping back into the shadows as he fell back in with the raptors. "Flee, my sons," he said, taking the head off one of the traitors to free the others. "I cannot risk another falling in this place." The veterans hesitated, but nodded as they broke away from the fight and headed towards one of the other entrances. Korix let the shadows fall away, turning to size up what forces remained. Cornix had fallen, his body crushed beneath a heavy blow from Perturabo. The Daemon Primarch carried the broken form of the Shadow Captain in his free hand, holding it up for Korix to see before casting it into the pit. "See what your weakness has led to, Korix?" he asked. "Your faith in your emperor has weakened you, just as Lorgar's faith in his god has blinded him. I am true strength, and I will make the galaxy tremble as Horus failed to do. Apologies, then, that I have to disappoint you." With that, Korix dove, turning around the raptors before angling towards Perturabo. The Daemon Primarch made to attack, but Korix fired his jump pack and charged, wrapping his arms around Perturabo's torso in an effort to force him over the edge. Just as the explosives above detonated, the lion had finished his preparations for the next stage of his campaign. Providing Korix managed to damage the Iron Warrior's fortress, he could move the rock to a more optimal bombardment position and call for a general advance, and perhaps finally put the traitors on the defensive. That fool Russ wanted to protect his world. Fine. I did not need his assistance here. He was shaken from his thoughts by the arrival of one of his captains. "My lord," the Astaroutes said, bowing low before continuing. "Our observers have just reported a large explosion at the Iron Warrior's fortress. It appears that a significant section of the fortress has caved in as a result." "And Korix's men?" the lion asked. "What of them?" "We have no confirmed survivors yet," the captain replied. Korix's Vox responded briefly after the explosion, but there has been no further contact. "We believe it may be damaged and he cannot yet reach us." The lion turned away. Korix would survive, no doubt, but without the Raven Guard Primarch much more of the campaign would have to be left to chance. "I cannot lose another brother to such circumstances," he thought. "Have the Raven Wing begin a search," he said, not turning to face the captain. "I want Korix and any others of his strike team recovered as soon as possible. I do not care if you must punch through the enemy lines time and again, I want him found." "Of course, my lord," the Astaroutes bowed again. "We do as you command." Down in the depths of Agrippina, the scarab stirred. It had rested for millennia, hiding away from those that sought to trap it. The traitorous sons, their abominable foes, and now these weak beings of flesh and steel, all it hid away from to avoid detection and potential destruction. As they chipped away at its prison, the scarab never once moved to enact the plan of the whole. But now, though, the scarab was disturbed. It skittered across the rubble, black stone flickering beneath its steps as it searched for the source of its disturbance. Being no larger than a small coin, it could continue apace without drawing too much attention, stopping and searching for any sign of life. A sound of settling rubble or a rush of wind would stop the scarab, its sensors probing about to find any sign of danger. Instead, it found opportunity. Laying in the center of the rubble was a massive being. The energy it gave off was wrong. The scarab could only sense a yawning void of some sort, its internal mechanisms whirring as it tried to make sense of what it saw. In a way, the being was made completely of that which should not exist, but all other inputs indicated that it was still flesh and blood, and metal. The scarab skittered onward, pushing up against the being as it probed for life. A pulse. It still lived. The scarab drew power to itself, rising up on its hind legs as it probed for a place to climb. The black stone around it trembled, some parts of the material shimmering as it twisted and wrapped around the scarab. It drew more material into itself, growing from the size of a coin to a larger replica the size of a human head. It would need more, no doubt, but as a start the black stone would suffice. The scarab found a point and began to climb, moving slowly so it did not slip on the metal beneath it. It searched for where the pulse was strongest, its sensors flicking across the body. The unnatural energies reached out towards it, but properly reinforced with blackstone, the scarab did not need to fear a thing. About halfway up the body, the scarab finally located the source of the pulse. The unnaturalness around it lashed out, the scarab drawing back for the briefest of moments as it drew more blackstone to itself. Now it was the size of an undamaged torso. Now it resembled its true form, an eyeless face, arrogant in its alien perfection. With another pulse of energy, the scarab bit down into the body beneath it.